On October the 28th last, 15-year-old Mary Collins gave birth to an illegitimate and premature baby. A few days later, the police exhumed the body of a baby boy from the back garden of this house. The Home Office pathologist, Professor Stone, revealed that prior to burial, the child had been strangled. 2 days later, Dominic Collins, Mary's father, was arrested and charged with murdering the child. His trial by jury begins today in Fulchester Crown Court before Mr. Justice Bragge.
Changes in the child's heart and circulatory system, the presence of food in the stomach, and changes in the umbilicus which occur 24 to 36 hours after birth.
And from your examination, Professor, what did you deduce?
The child was born live.
So Mary Collins gave birth to a live child?
That is so, ma'am. If you wish, I can enumerate the various tests I undertook on the body of the child.
No, I don't think that will be necessary, Professor. I'm in favour of keeping the evidence as simple as possible. Miss Tate?
Oh, like you, my lord, I believe in keeping things simple.
Mr. Fry?
No, I can't promise that I won't have to go into detail, my lord.
Very well, Mr. Fry. Continue, Miss Tate.
What sex was the child?
It was male.
A little boy. Were you able to determine the cause of his death?
Yes. The body had been wrapped in a piece of blanket, but I was able to establish that the buried child had been asphyxiated, almost certainly by strangulation.
What indications were there, Professor Stone, which suggested strangulation?
Well, there were a number of fingertip bruises and nail imprints found on the neck. The nail imprints are recognized by their crescent shape.
Now, as far as you were able to tell from the post-mortem, was the baby otherwise healthy and normal?
Yes.
It wasn't deformed in any way?
No.
A perfectly normal birth?
Yes.
Now, after the body of the little boy was exhumed, you examined the mother, Mary Collins, did you not?
I did.
Now, it may be part of the defence's case that Mary Collins, who is 15 years of age and still at school, successfully disguised her pregnancy from her parents. Now, Professor Stone, in your opinion, is this possible?
I should have thought not, certainly in the intimacy of the normal family circle.
Thank you, Professor.
Professor, there have been many, many reports, have there not, of cases of disguised pregnancy, even of cases where the mother herself was unaware until the last moment that she was pregnant.
Yes, but most of such cases have involved obese, overweight women, whereas Mary Collins is a slimly built small girl of 15.
Now, you said that the indications were that the body had been asphyxiated by strangulation.
That is correct.
And that it had been buried in the Collins' back garden for about 6 days.
Yes, 6 days.
Had there been any decomposition of the body whilst buried, which might have made the results of your examination less precise?
No, there was hardly any decomposition at all. The bitterly cold weather at the time would have prevented any rapid decomposition. It would take longer than 6 days in that cold.
Very well, Professor. Let us return to the details of the asphyxiation. Now, you say that there were fingertip bruises and nail imprints on the neck of the child.
Yes.
Is it not correct that marks very similar to these are produced following a mother's attempt at self-delivery?
Well, yes, that is possible, but
Thank
on
you,
the
Professor.
other hand, when one...
A few moments ago, you told the court that, in your opinion, the child had been strangled. Now we hear that the evidence you relied on could have been interpreted in another way. Come now, Professor, please make up your mind. We are not playing lucky dip.
Mr. Fry, you do not have to remind me that we're in a courtroom and not a fairground. If you would kindly permit me to finish what I'm saying...
Fry, I'm quite sure that Professor Stone does not regard this trial as a lucky dip.
No.
Continue, Professor.
The point is that there are always a number of factors to take into account when assessing cause of death.
Well, in this
Apart
case,
from the
Professor,
markings on the neck, I found the following. Intense congestion of veins, innumerable petechial hemorrhages, pinpoint blood spots over the skin, heart and lungs, and lastly, frothed fluid in the air passages. Now, these factors, together with the markings on the neck, led me almost without doubt to just one conclusion.
And what was that, Professor?
Asphyxiation by manual strangulation.
You're very positive about that.
Yes, I am.
As positive as you were in an article you wrote for the Catholic Doctor, a medical publication, on the 4th of January 1971. You are a Catholic, Professor.
Yes.
I would like, with the court's permission, to read a couple of brief extracts from this article, my lord.
My lord, Professor Stone wrote this article 2 years ago. What possible relevance can it have today?
The background and attitude of any witness, particularly an expert witness, can be of great importance, Miss Tate. You may read your extracts, Mr. Fry.
Thank you, my lord. Professor, is it not true that you wrote an article in the Catholic Doctor on infanticide?
Yes.
In which you said, and I quote, Infanticide is an evil crime which man by his laws forgives more easily than does God. Did you write that?
Yes.
In the same article you said, it is a crime peculiarly abhorrent to the Catholic, representing as it does the destruction of an innocent human being. You went on to advocate sterner penalties for infanticide, did you not?
That is correct.
Do you still hold those beliefs, Professor?
Yes.
Can you honestly swear that your religious beliefs would never influence your evidence?
No, sir, of course I cannot, but in this case the facts are clear.
But with respect, Professor, your evidence also contained opinion. For example, you said that it was possible that the bruises on the child's neck were caused by the mother's desperate attempts at self-delivery. Now you opt for a different conclusion.
Mr. Fry, your lordship, my opinion, as you call it, is based on years of experience and study. It is true that I'm a Catholic, but I'm also a forensic pathologist. I submit to two disciplines, and I've never yet known the demands of my church or of my profession to conflict.
A final question, Professor. Would it require great strength to strangle a premature child?
No, not great strength.
Could any person of average strength, man, woman, or child, have strangled this baby?
Yes.
Thank you.
You may stand down, Professor.
My next witness is Mrs. Elaine Hill. I apologize.
Mrs. Elaine Hill, please.
Take the testament in your right hand and read aloud the words on the card.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Are you Mrs. Elaine Hill of 36 Tenniel Crescent, Fulchester?
Yes.
You live next door to the Collins?
That's right. They live in number 34.
On the 3rd of November last, did you go to the police?
Yes.
Why?
Well, I thought it was my duty. You see, it was obvious that Mary Collins had been pregnant, and now suddenly she wasn't. So what had happened to the child?
You were worried about the child?
Yes.
Rightly, as it seems, Mrs. Hill. Now, what made you think that Mary Collins was pregnant?
Well, you only had to use your eyes. Mind you, I will say she disguised it well.
How?
Well, she goes to one of those comprehensive schools where they don't wear school uniform, and for several months she'd worn smocks. That is, when she went to school, she was away a lot of the time.
Did you ever have conversation with Mr. Collins or his wife about their daughter's absenteeism?
Yes, I asked Mrs. Collins if Mary was ill.
And what did she say?
She said no, she wasn't ill. It was something to do with the religious instruction at the school. I believe Mr. Collins is very religious.
But you say it was obvious to you that Mary was pregnant.
Yes. You must remember I've known Mary ever since the Collins moved into 34.
How long is that?
11 years. Mary was 4 when they came.
So you know the family well by now?
No.
Not after 11 years?
Well, I don't think anyone can claim to know the Collins well.
Why is that?
Well, they're not very approachable people, particularly him.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Would you explain that?
Well, he has some very strange religious views. He started to explain them to me one day, but I wasn't very interested, so he never spoke to me again. I mean, literally. Not even good morning when I spoke to him first, which I didn't often do.
But you were on speaking terms with Mary and Mrs. Collins?
Oh, yes. Of course, if Mary was with her father, you never got a chance, but otherwise she was very friendly.
And what about her mother?
Oh, Evelyn was only too happy to talk to anyone, poor thing.
Why, poor thing?
Well, she couldn't have had much of a life at home.
Why not?
Well, he treated her as if she didn't exist. I mean, she was left out of everything. I mean, if Mr. Collins went out, he took his daughter with him. He never took his wife. He thought the sun, moon, and stars shone out of that child.
Would you describe his affection for Mary as obsessive?
Lord, quite apart from the fact that my friend is leading the witness, I fail to see what these questions have to do with the case.
I will rephrase the question, my lord. Mrs. Hill, would you say that Mr. Collins was devoted to his daughter?
Devoted? He was silly about her. I mean, nothing was too good for Mary. The money that was lavished on that child's clothes alone...
What made you think that Mary had had the baby?
Well, I hadn't seen her for about a week, and then when I did see her, she was obviously slimmer. I mean, she'd either been on the most incredible crash diet, or she'd had it. The child.
Did you speak to Mrs. Collins?
Yes, I saw her a few days later, and I asked how Mary was, and how she'd managed to lose so much weight all of a sudden.
And what did Mrs. Collins say? She said something, did she?
No, she didn't. She just ran off, which was very odd for Evelyn. I mean, she usually enjoyed a chat, particularly when he wasn't there.
That's Mr. Collins?
Yes. It was the only chance she ever got.
Now, can you remember an incident taking place in the Collins house shortly before November the 3rd when you went to the police?
Oh, you mean the row? Yes, it was the night of October the 28th. There was a terrible row in the Collins house.
A row?
Oh, yes, shouting and screaming. You've never heard anything like it.
It surprised you?
Well, yes, because normally the Collins were as quiet as mice, but you could hear this the other end of the crescent.
Did anything else happen?
Yes, the morning after, that's after the row, I noticed a small patch of garden had been dug over.
You were surprised?
Yes.
Why?
Well, Mr. Collins wasn't a keen gardener at the best of times, and I remember noticing only the day before the state of that vegetable bed, and then suddenly there it was, a small patch of freshly dug garden. Well, I mean, it didn't make sense.
Why not?
Well, if he was going to dig the garden, he'd have dug the whole bed, not a small patch 4 or 5 feet square.
Did you immediately suspect what had happened?
No, I didn't. To be honest, I didn't connect the row with the garden.
When did you do this?
Well, a few days later, I saw Mary, and I simply mentioned that her father had been doing some gardening.
Did Mary react?
Yes, in the most extraordinary manner. She screamed, "Oh, it's all so awful," burst into tears and ran off.
And then you went to the police?
Well, I talked it over with a friend first, and then I went to the police, yes.
Thank you, Mrs. Collins. Mrs. Hill. Wait there, please.
Miss Hill, why did you wait for a week before you went to the police?
Well, I wasn't absolutely sure. I wasn't imagining things. I mean, the only thing I really couldn't understand was how Mary could have got pregnant in the first place.
Why?
Well, her father never left her out of his sight, and she never went out with boys. In fact, she rarely went out at all. She didn't seem to have any friends come to the house, girls or boys. Well, suppose I'd been imagining it. Suppose Mr. Collins had merely been burying some rubbish in the garden.
What made you change your mind?
Well, my friend has a daughter who goes to the same school as Mary Collins, and she said there had been some complaints about Mary, that she couldn't leave the boys alone.
No, it's a lie, a lie. She mustn't say it.
Mr. Collins.
My daughter's not a whore.
Mr. Collins.
She's not a whore.
Mr. Collins, if an accused person's behaviour interferes with the course of a trial, then a judge has the power to have him removed and to proceed in his absence. You understand that? Are you ready to go on?
Yes, I'm all right. Let's get on with it, please. I'm sorry, my lord.
Very well. Mr. Fry?
Thank you, my lord. Mrs. Hill, you said that your attention was attracted to the Collins household on October the 28th because of a row. Shouting and screaming, you called it.
Yes.
You could hear them at the other end of the crescent, you said.
Yes.
Who was shouting and screaming?
Who?
Yes, who?
I don't know.
Mr. Collins, Mrs. Collins, Mary Collins?
I don't know.
Why not?
Well, I didn't hear exactly.
Well, what were they shouting and screaming then?
What?
Well, surely you were able to distinguish the odd word.
No.
Well, perhaps if you'd gone out into the garden, you might
I
have...
did go out into the garden.
And you still couldn't hear anything?
No.
Perhaps this wasn't such a violent row after all. Perhaps there wasn't any screaming.
There was.
Loud enough to be heard at the other end of the crescent?
Well,
Did any of your neighbours complain about this violent row?
I don't know.
Did any of your neighbours later mention this row to you?
Well, no.
Oh. Well, perhaps we'd better turn to another point of your evidence, Mrs. Hill. Now, you said that it was obvious to you that Mary was pregnant.
Yes.
When did it become obvious?
I don't remember.
Well, was it in July?
No.
Earlier? Later?
Oh, it was after July.
August? September? October?
Well, at the end of September, I suppose.
No more than 3 or 4 weeks before the birth of the child.
I suppose so.
Can you be sure of the date?
No.
You mean it could have been only 2 or 3 weeks before October the 28th?
Well, I think it was earlier than that.
You've known Mary Collins for a long time. You've known her for 11 years. Yet you didn't suspect that there might be anything wrong until 3 or 4 weeks before the child was born. She must have disguised the pregnancy very well.
I've said she did.
Well enough to keep the secret from her parents.
My lord.
Mr. Fry, I don't see how the witness can possibly answer that question.
As your lordship pleases. I withdraw the question. Now, Mrs. Hill, I'm very interested in this argument you had with Mr. Collins, after which he never spoke to you again. It was about religion, you said.
That's right. Well, sort of.
It wasn't about religion.
Well, Mr. Collins and I had always been very friendly. He always used to stop and chat with me in the street if ever we met. Well, one day he started to talk to me about religion. Well, I was in a hurry, and anyway, I'm not religious. And he does have some very strange ideas. Well, he must have seen I wasn't interested. Anyway, a little later, I was sunbathing in my garden in my bikini, and he suddenly leaned over the fence and started shouting.
Shouting?
Yes, something about Babylon and mystery. I didn't understand it all.
Babylon, the mother of harlots and of the abomination of the earth?
Yes, that's right.
The Scarlet Woman, Lord. The revelation of St. John the Divine. And on her forehead was a name written. Mystery, Babylon the Great, etc., etc.
Your biblical erudition is impressive, Mr. Fry.
I come from a long line of clergymen, Lord. Ah. I think Mr. Collins was protesting about the brevity of your bikini, Mrs. Hill.
Yes, I'd gathered that.
And after this incident, he never spoke to you again, not even if you spoke to him first?
No.
So from that time onwards, your relations with the family were never the same again?
Well, not with Mr. Collins, certainly.
And this occurred some time ago?
About 6 years ago.
And nor with Mary and Mrs. Collins, apparently.
Well, after a while, Mrs. Collins and I started to talk again.
With the old degree of intimacy?
Well, I don't know, really. It's hard to say.
Well, did you ever visit each other's homes again?
Not often.
Did you ever visit the Collins household when Mr. Collins was present?
No.
So your evidence about the relations between the Collins family, between Mr. and Mrs. Collins and their daughter, is at least 6 years old, isn't it?
Well, I wouldn't say that.
Let us now turn to another matter. It would seem that in spite of your study of Mary Collins, you were never quite sure that she had been pregnant.
No, I wasn't.
But the one thing that convinced you, wasn't it, was this story of your friend about Mary Collins and the boys at school.
Yes.
Now, why should this convince you?
Well, Mary didn't seem to see any boys. I mean, I just didn't see how she could have become pregnant, unless it was a virgin birth.
Blasphemer!
Mr. Collins, I warned you.
I'm sorry, my lord. It is blasphemy.
Mrs. Hill, I think your choice of words was unfortunate.
Well, I'm sorry, Your Honour. I didn't mean to give offence.
A final point, Mrs. Hill. You said that when you met Mary in the street and mentioned that somebody seemed to have been digging in her father's garden, she screamed, "Oh, it's all so awful," and ran off.
Yes.
What did you presume her to mean by that?
Well, that her father had buried the baby there.
But why?
It was obvious.
You didn't see Mr. Collins burying anything, did you?
No.
In fact, you don't know which member of the Collins family buried the child.
No.
Or indeed if it was any member of the Collins family at all.
Well, it couldn't have been anybody else, could it?
That is for the jury to decide, Mrs. Hill.
I would just like to clarify 2 small points, my lord. Mrs. Hill, although you never saw the Collins family en masse in their own home, was there any reason at all for you to presume that Mr. Collins had had a change of heart with regard to his daughter?
No, quite the reverse.
You're saying that he became more possessive?
Yes. You see, by that time, Mary was old enough to be taken out.
Did he take his daughter out as much as his wife?
Oh, much more, as far as I could see.
Now, regarding the question of burial, you saw no one digging in the Collins garden?
No.
Did you see any strangers in the area?
No.
Thank you, Mrs. Hill. That concludes the case for the prosecution, my lord.
You may stand down, Mrs. Hill.
I call the defendant, Dominic Edgar Collins.
What is your religion?
Christian.
Take the testament in your right hand and read aloud the words on the card.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
You are Dominic Edgar Collins, of 34 Tenniel Crescent, Fulchester.
I am.
What is your occupation, Mr. Collins?
I am a senior quality control officer of computer components at Tennyson Computers.
You've been described as a religious man. Would you agree with that?
I try to be.
You've taken an oath to tell the truth. You have sworn on the Bible.
I'm aware of that.
Do you regard the Bible as a holy book?
The Bible is the only book in which there is any truth.
Would you break an oath which you had sworn on the Bible?
I couldn't.
Did you strangle your daughter's newly born child on the evening of October the 28th?
I did not.
Did you know that your daughter was pregnant?
No.
Are you sure of that?
I know it sounds stupid. I can't think why I didn't notice. But it just never occurred to me that Mary might... I thought she was putting on a lot of weight.
You saw your daughter every day?
Yes.
But it never occurred to you that she might be pregnant?
No. You see, I kept her pure. At least I thought I did. She had no boyfriends. Wherever she wanted to go, I went with her. I thought she was not like other girls of her age. Foolish. Sensual. I tried to keep her pure.
But you failed.
I was proud of my daughter's purity. I was punished for it.
When did you first discover that Mary was pregnant?
When I found her.
Could you tell us what has happened in the weeks preceding that?
Mary had been off school for about 10 days.
Why?
She said she wasn't well.
Didn't you call a doctor?
She said it wasn't serious. A normal ailment of women. If a woman have an issue, and her issue in her flesh be blood, she shall be set apart 7 days.
Leviticus?
Yes. Mary said that seeing the doctor about it would embarrass her. I understood. I thought it was because she was pure. I thought that talking to a stranger about a thing like that might... I could see it would embarrass her.
And what happened on that day, the 28th of October?
Mary was upstairs in her room, lying down. My wife and I heard her cry out several times. My wife went up to see her. She didn't come down. After a bit, I went up. My wife was in the bathroom, trying to wash some of the bedding. I went into my daughter's room. I found her lying there. There was blood. Beside her lay this abomination.
Abomination. Did you touch the child?
No, I couldn't. I couldn't touch. All I could think was my daughter was defiled.
Was the child alive when you entered the bedroom?
It didn't seem to be.
When did you first realize that it was dead?
A little later. My wife was trying to help Mary. And I realized the child hadn't cried out. It was silent. I picked it up finally, and it seemed to be dead.
What did you do then?
I couldn't believe it at first. I thought I must be dreaming, or I'd gone mad.
And what did you do? Did you take it from the room?
No. It was such a small thing. I knew I ought to tell the police, but I couldn't because of Mary. She's only 15.
And then?
My wife found a piece of blanket. I wrapped the child in it. I went out into the garden, got a spade, dug a hole. I don't know. I suppose I put the bundle into the hole and covered it up. I don't see I could have done anything else. Do you?